This is a very handy machine. It's a very powerful sander. It's a bit large for a small shop. This weighs over 300 pounds. This was an impulse buy for me. I found it on sale. I had seen something similar on Yankee Workshop, and I thought if Norm Abrams has one, well, Ron ought to have one. And that was my justification. I've had this for 10, 11 years. I've used it much more than I ever anticipated. But as handy as this machine is, it's a huge pain in the butt. And the problem is right here where the spindle's attached to the machine. The bottom of the spindle shafts have a taper. That taper is held in by a thread. This gets jammed in here tight and you can't get it loose. And when you get a spindle stuck in here, you've got a real problem. I'm not going to show you a fix. I don't think there is a fix. You need to learn how to deal with the machine that you own. Grizzly needs to fix their problem and address this issue. I'm going to show you a few helpful hints of things that I do and don't do, and I hope they do help. Basically, there are two spindle sizes. The ones here on the left that a wrench can more easily access these spindle nuts while the sanding sleeves are still on them. And then you have the ones on the right where the sanding sleeves overlap the spindle nuts. For these spindles on the right, these spindle shafts are all exactly the same size. And they have a rubber insert that slides down on that shaft, and that insert supports this sanding sleeve. Take the time to remove all of these rubber sleeves from these spindle shafts. It's not the easiest thing to do, but take the time to do it. Mine were rusty on the inside, and it made it very difficult to remove this rubber section. And in order to be able to do what I'm going to show you, these rubber sleeves you need to be able to slide those up and down on these shafts as easy as possible. So you want to polish them up and put a little wax on there to keep them from rusting again. When you get ready to use one of these sanding sleeves, go ahead and tighten this nut. Tighten it down enough, or use a wrench if you like, but only tighten that enough to keep the sanding sleeve from slipping on the rubber and the rubber from slipping on this spindle shaft. When you're done, loosen that nut. That'll allow that rubber to relax. It'll relax on the shaft and on the sleeve. And then in the future, when you get ready to change one of these sleeves, life will be a lot easier. My machine came with some metal inserts that had elongated holes in it because this table is made to where it can tilt. I've used this machine for 11 years. I have never tilted the table yet. And those metal inserts I didn't find were very good. I made these. They have some leveling screws that'll engage on this lip, and this pin keeps this thing from turning. And then you've got a finger hole so you can pick it up. One word of caution, you don't ever want to try to remove one of these when the machine is still turning. You can lose a finger or a hand. When I put one of these in, I usually reach in here and I make that hand tight. I don't tighten it any tighter than that because they can be so difficult to remove. When sanding on the machine, only push the work into the sanding sleeve enough to allow the grit on the sandpaper to do the work. Do not push into this thing and overload the sandpaper. Reverse torque tightens that spindle. The more you push in here, the more reverse torque is on that spindle shaft, on that taper, and the tighter it will become. Also, when you're sanding on this, you're generating heat. Your sandpaper will last a long time on one of these if you just let the sandpaper do the work. Don't get the sandpaper hot, which in turn will heat up that rubber sleeve, and you can get it so hot that you'll burn the wood. Gently push it in there, move it back and forth, let the sandpaper do the work. If you own one of these machines, you'll soon find out that the larger the sanding sleeve, the tighter they become and the more difficult to remove. These four larger sleeves, hand tight, seem to stay tight. The smaller sleeves, such as these, you put that down in there, and when you're using it, you'll see it start jiggling around. It's trying to shake itself loose. If I'm using one of these, I'll be sanding on there. If I see this thing's jiggling a little bit, I just turn it off. I tighten it again, and go back to sanding. I have not used wrenches to tighten these on the machine. Again, because they're so darn hard to get loose. I've never used this larger sanding sleeve, and that's because I know it's going to get jammed on here so tight that I'm going to have a hell of a time getting it loose. This is the original sanding sleeve that came with the machine. This is a dust cup. This main shaft oscillates or reciprocates up and down. This dust cup is in there to keep sawdust and that from getting onto the extended shaft and keep it away from the bearings and seals. This bottom nut tightens the dust cup onto this reciprocating shaft or oscillating shaft, and the top nut is a jam nut for the bottom one. On these sanding sleeves, you've got two different size nuts. On the large ones, they're all the same. They're a narrower, thinner nut. On the small spindles, the nuts are bigger, and that's because these shafts are made to size for the sanding sleeve. There's no rubber in there. And then the sanding sleeve goes into a recess on this nut, and it's locked in place with this set screw. Not the best deal in the world, but it works. On my spindles, these were rusty, and the only way I could get that sandpaper off of there was to tear it off. Keep these spindle shafts clean, polished, and put a little wax on there to keep that from rusting. Want to keep the spindle socket clean, keep debris and sawdust out of that pocket down there, blow it out with compressed air. You've got this thread assembly down in there, and then when you tighten this, these threads are pulling that taper tight. Want to keep this taper clean. Any debris or anything that's on there can cause you problems. Here's one that's gotten dirty on me. You get these little chunks of stuff embedded on here, and that can help wedge that spindle in there and make it difficult to remove. So keep all this stuff clean. I would not recommend putting oil or wax on these because that's just going to attract sawdust and make it ultimately more difficult to keep clean. If you're in a damp shop and you have to, put some oil on here, very light. Make sure you wipe it off before you go putting it in the machine. The original dust collection arrangement on this machine was pretty useless regardless of the size of your dust collector. It has this nozzle type thing that comes around this dust cup, and it provided for a connection to about a 3-inch hose. So there's no way that this could provide any type of negative pressure around the base of the table and where the sleeve is going up and down. I have a video that shows how I encapsulated the bottom side of this table so that I get a downdraft around the sanding sleeve, and that increases your dust collection efficiency. My modification under here and the way that I enclose this, it's made out of plywood. It's something you just have to build yourself. Mine is removable. In the 10 or so years that I've owned this machine, I've never tilted the table. If you want to tilt the table, you have to remove that enclosure that I built. Or if these sanding spindles become stuck and you have to try to get underneath the table with a wrench, then you would have to remove that arrangement as well. From that standpoint, my enclosure would not be very convenient if you have to go in here and try to unjam one of these spindles every day or twice a day. You would think Grizzly would have upgraded this machine by now. The spindle attachment section is very poorly designed. This threaded section on this needs to be higher so that these nuts can be thicker. These are 1.25 inch nuts. When you go to get an open-end wrench to fit on a nut like this, it's going to be fairly thick. You cannot get a wrench on this nut and get a wrench on the spindle nut. And even these nuts, they need to be thicker so that a common wrench will fit on there. These are the junk wrenches that come with this machine. They're made out of sheet metal. This one wouldn't even fit. I had to try and grind it out. By the time you do that, this is so weak it won't do anything. These are a joke. In fact, they're an insult to be supplied with the machine that you have to pay the kind of money that you do for one of these. Most times when you have a spindle, the spindle is a wedge fit, like on a milling machine or whatever, and then you have a way of being able to drive that spindle loose from the bottom side. These are tightened with a nut. There's no way to knock that loose. They can put a locking mechanism on this shaft just like you have on a grinder when you go to change out sanding or grinding disc on a grinder. These nuts are 32 millimeter. The ones on the spindle shaft are 29 millimeter. It's purely an accident that an 1¼ inch wrench will fit on here. When you get a wrench that's this big, they're going to be thick. And the only solution that I can offer on you having a wrench is to find a 32 and a 29 millimeter open end wrench, go to a machine shop or grind it yourself, and grind the face of this wrench until it's about the same thickness as this nut. You have to grind that real slow. You don't want to overheat this and take the temper out of the wrench, or you'll have the same worthless thing as those junk wrenches that came with the machine. You're not going to be able to get 2 wrenches of this size on this nut and on the spindle at the same time, especially when you're using a large sanding sleeve and it's covering up this nut. And on the larger sanding sleeves, that nut is even thinner. So that's the only suggestion I can offer as far as having a wrench like this. You're going to have to go get one made yourself. When you use any of these larger sleeves, you can no longer see the nut that's underneath the sanding sleeve. Even if I slide that up a little bit, you can just start to see that nut. You can't get to it with the sanding sleeve on there. When I get one of these stuck, I'll bang on this thing, reach down in here, jiggle on it, and usually I can get one of those loose. That's also when I end up getting a bunch of blood bruises on the back of my hand, especially if I hit the corner of that little puppy. Now I can take this out. If that's stuck in there still, then your next solution is to take this nut off, the washer, put that sanding sleeve out of there, and pull this rubber up. And this is coming off relatively easy. Another reason for keeping those spindle shafts clean. Another problem with these spindle shafts, this thread diameter is the same diameter as the shaft. This thread diameter needs to be a little smaller so that you don't have any drag on this rubber when you're trying to get that rubber sleeve off of there. Another solution, you can reach in here and pry up on this gently with a piece of wood to help get that to come up. You don't want to tear up that bottom rubber. Once you get to where you can't go any higher, you can put another block under there and help jack that thing up in the air until you can get it to come off. Get this other piece out of there. If you don't have those larger wrenches, reach in here with a crescent wrench. Go to Sears. You can buy some of these wrenches. Get it in there at an angle. Try to get those two to clear each other and give that a bang. That'll give you enough to get that thing to loosen up a little bit. And I'm doing this from the top. You can come in from the bottom on this if you don't have the table enclosed for dust collection. These are a little bit thinner, but they're still not thin enough. All you got to do, you only have to get that thing to move a fraction of an inch and it'll loosen up. You don't want to damage those nuts either. So get a good grip on it and then just a little bit like that and it'll let go. Then put all this back together. Easiest to do while it's on the machine. The other thing I do when I'm through sanding with one of these, I immediately remove it from here. Another possibility is to reach underneath here with one of these wrenches. Just get it on that nut. Get a strap wrench. You can put that strap wrench around there and use that just to get that to loosen up, maybe. Another solution for the manufacturer to help alleviate this problem is to have a shaft lock on this oscillating spindle, just like you'd have on a grinder, and to have a hex socket machined into this shaft so you can put an Allen wrench in there and jar this thing loose. Or if you have a 300-pound gorilla living in the neighborhood, keep him on speed dial. He'll be busy helping you trying to take this thing apart. I can't imagine anyone trying to do production work using one of these machines. You pay good money for a machine like this, you shouldn't have to fight it to use it. I think everyone who owns one of these should write a letter to the owner of Grizzly complaining about it.